One of the things you find when you're an analyst is you always get these requests where you have to do tiny tweaks to like different buckets, groups, and this can be down to the requester changing their mind on what sort of range they wanted in those groups, or a change in the data and therefore it needs to be reclassified. And as you can imagine, it's very time consuming. So what if you could put the power back into the business's hands and play around till they get the range so they know what actually works for them? Well, I'm going to show you how to do that with a threshold that shows you above and below, and then being able to select the deviations of the amount in those ranges, and then it will hit between those ranges, and then anything above and below those will then just be anything greater than or less than. So let's jump over to my Power BI desktop and I'll show you how to do it. So if you want to follow along, the data set is in the description below, and also so is the PBIX file that I'm going to be going through here. So in this example, I'm going to be using margin as the actual grouping point. And as you can see what we've got here, I've got two different types of selectors, and then this is the table of the data. So this is what the final output will look like. And this selector selects the point of where your middle point is. So therefore anything above and below. So as we can see here, anything that's green is above 25%, and anything that is then below is red. And then if we just open up here, you can see up to here, the last point was 25. And then if we open up this one where it's below 25, this is the next state that is then within that particular range. But you'll notice it's not just looking above and below, it's actually breaking them out by 1%. So to here, this is anything from 25 to 26%, 26 to 27, 27 to 28, and then I've just maxed it out. You can create more if you wanted to, but in this case I've just maxed it out to just this many deviations. And anything above 28% is your remaining amounts, and then the reverse works where you get 25 to 24. In this case there actually isn't any, so it doesn't actually show up. Then you got 24 to 23, 23 to 22, and then therefore anything below 22 is then what you got here. And these all show anything below 22, which even goes into minus amounts, and ones where they don't even have any margin. And this is all controlled from another slider over here where you can adjust. So say if we wanted to make it 2% difference, we suddenly get a change here where now we're covering a different range. So now we're going all the way from 25 to 23, 23 to 21, and then below 19. Same with the other one, up by 2, 25 to 27, and all the way up to 30, greater than 31%. And just so if you're going to be doing this from scratch using the data set that I've provided, all you need to do is create the margin, which is the divide of back sales profit and back sales total sales. And what those are just a sum of the profit column and a sum of the sales column. And then I've just called them total profit and total sales, and then I've just divided them in the margin. But you can download the PBIX file just to check if you just want some clarification. So first things first, what we want to do is create these two selectors. And how you do those is going up to modeling, and if we go new parameter and go numeric range, here you can create what you want to call your particular numeric range. Now, I've already created these, but I'll just show you how you can do it, especially when it comes to doing percentages and stuff. So for this one, and it's no different really, both are created the same way. So all you do is just repeat, you just change what your maximum and minimum is. For this one over here, where it's the one on the left, let's just do margin, percentage selector, and then I need to make it decimal number, and then the maximum, because it's going to be a percentage, is 100, so that's 1. And then increments, I wanted to go up by 0.5%, so I do 0.005, and then default, which never seems to actually work, but let's just put it in anyway. I wanted to do 0.25, so then you got 25%. And then all you do is create it, or create a slider, and then you'll get this pop up. And the same for this one on the right, which is the var selector. You just create another one. So you just go in, select your model, go in here, and then you just call it var, and then you do the same increments, but for your maximum, you probably don't want it to go too far, so you might just want it to go maybe like 10% differences. So therefore you can just put in a maximum of 0.1 to do 10%. And then all you just do is create, and then you get another slider that will give you this one over here. Now, when they come in as decimal places. So what you want to be able to do is just go to the table that has the information in, and then if you click on the one here, which has the little question mark on, this is the one that's actually added into the slider. You can always tell because it's got a little tick next to it when you click on the thing. And then over here you can just select percentage on the format, or you can just click on the percentage here, and then you can select one decimal place. And then that's the same you do for here as well, which is this one. And then here you can see with a little question mark on, and then just change it to one decimal place of percentage. Then once you've got those done, what you want to be able to do is then create your groups. Now I've created a really long name You don't have to. The only reason why I've done this is because then it just explains exactly what it is. I try and go into detail, but you don't have to write a big name that is like this. But whatever you do as your grouping and what you want to call them, all you need to do is go up to here to enter data, and then you just want to add in what your table is. Now I already have the table created, but I'll just recreate it now. And then all you want to do in this case, what I've called it is percentage of deviations. So if I just copy this over, call that my title, and I call that there. And then also I want to be able to add in a sort, because sometimes it can go out of sort, but really if you just buy the actual metric you're doing it by and sort it that way, it normally sorts it out. But just to be on the safe side, it's good to just have a sort anyway. And then you can just start adding in whatever you want to call your tables. So here I already have them listed, so I'm just going to copy them over. And then if you've already got them in a list, you can do this. You can just click in the box, don't double click like that, just grey, highlight, click, and then you've got them all in there. And then you can just add in your sort like that, and then you've got that sorted. And then all you do is just do load, and then that's all you need. It doesn't need to be connected or anything, but then all it does is just, it looks like this, just a table that you're going to be using as you reference. So now we have that. What we want to do is then create a matrix table. Let's bring this down here. And then we're going to drop in our deviation names, which is here. We drop that into the rows. So you can see we've now got that. Also, to be able to ensure that you got it done by the sort, if you come up to sort by column here and select sort, that means it would always do it in that order instead of doing it in alphabetical order of the column. And then once you've got that in there, we can then go and get our margin. So let's do margin %. There it is. Drop that in. And then as you'll notice, for now, everything's showing as 12.7%, which is the total, as we can see here. It's actually giving it for all. And the reason being is we don't actually have anything set to be able to filter to any things that are over or under that deviation. This might look a bit complicated, but it's really not. And the easiest way to maintain this, and this is also if you ever want to move over to try different metrics when you're doing this, if you set everything up with variables, you can just place in what they are, and then it pulls through all the changes. So if you wanted to change the selector, the metric, all you have to do is just change them here, and then you've got your whole new filter for your group. So what this is going to do is basically create a true or false. This is where the int comes from, so it's creating a 1 or a 0, and you're basically going, if these are greater than or between this particular metric, which in this case is margin, then give it a 1, if not a 0, and then it just keeps repeating that in a sort of if function. But in this case I'm using switch, where it will just then go, is it greater than? Yes, cool. Anything else, I need to then take that range out. Now, one thing with this, if you've ever worked with switch or if, normally when you're creating a bucket or a group, it normally goes, oh yeah, I know that once you've already went, if this is true, don't do this. But it doesn't work like this, because what you're asking for is something if it's greater than. Each time you want to cut it off from wherever that last point was. So if you kept saying everything was greater than, then it's always going to be true, and therefore you won't get a proper grouping. So all you need to do to make this work is that you need to create a variable that basically holds your metric, in this case margin, and then the value of your selector, that's the one on the left, so that's the one that's the greater than or equal to, and this is this one here. So you see we've got one that looks like a measure in here, and the same with the var selector, we got it there. So all I call it is selector, and then var selector as a different breakout. And as you can see, when I click on the different ones, it highlights here so you can see what's going on. And then all I do for the result is I wrap everything in the int, which is again, all I'm doing is just doing it. So I'm getting a true false as a 1 or a 0. I'm wrapping it in a switch and then true. And then what I'm doing here is focusing on what am I looking for. So in this case, I'm doing selected value is equal to whatever the name is in the table. So in this case, I'm doing it in the order of top to bottom. So the greatest one was plus percentage 3 or more deviations. So that's the one that does the greater than. And so I'm doing that as my first one. So all you do is you wrap a selected value over the column that you're going to be using. So as we know, I've created that table that's done those different deviations. That's the table column name, and that's the table. And we just want to wrap that in a selected value. And then we want to do equal, whichever one you want. In this case, it's the first one. And this one's pretty straightforward, because all we're doing is going, if the margin is greater than the selector, which is the margin selector value, plus 3 times the variation selector. So that's like you take, in this case, so if we go and then look at this, you're going, is margin greater than this plus 3 times this? And this 3 times is 6. Add that to 25 and you get 31, and that's how comes you get the greater than 31. And then you repeat the same, but you're going in between. So if we go back, the next ones you have to do is go wrap again. So it's a simple case of just copy and paste. It's always going to be wrapping around that column in that table. And then all you're doing is giving it the next name, what you want to do it to. And then this one is you select the metric and it's greater than and equal to. The reason being is this one, you want it to be greater than whatever the last one is, but this one, you want to be at or above, and then you do the selector times 2, so then that's 2 times 2, which equals 4, add that to the selector, which is 25, equals 29, and then you want to do and is between, so that's what it creates, is less than or equal to what was 31, and you have to do, in this case, an equals to is because you've already done greater than, so therefore you need to include 31 into this one. So that's where it grabs this, and then you get 29 to 31. The only difference is for your next deviations, when you're including these, are that you don't want to do equals to because you're already picking up what the last one was here as equals to. The reason why you don't want to put that one there is because you're always doing greater than. You could, if you wanted to, do equals to and greater than if you wanted to, and then all you do is just change it out this way. But always ensure that when you're working your way through this list is that you're always picking the right one to be used in this case. And then, like I say, all you do is you keep adding each one to then fill out your main list. And all you're doing is working your way down. So for here, the next one is only 1 times, which actually is only going to be once. So you're just doing 27 now because selector 25, and then that's 27, and then less than 29, and then the next one is going exactly on the selector, but that means 25, and then to 27 or less than 27. And then the only changes that start to happen is when you're doing the minus deviation, so less than whatever you selected. This is where then you change the title, because you see here it's got plus 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 and then it goes minus 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 minus. Got 4 pluses, 4 minuses. Here you have to think of it backwards now, because now you're working your way around the other way. So now you're going, is it less than, so this side is now less than the top point, which is your 25%, and then you're doing from 23%, because what you're doing is it greater than selector minus, this time minus 1, so 2% minus on 25 to 23, and then you keep repeating and repeating until you get to the point of where you get to the last one. So as you can see here, we've got our greater than or equal to or less than, and then we've got here works slightly different because we still want it less than, because we're already doing equal to or greater than 3 times minus, but this is actually greater than. So it's a slight difference to when it's the plus, but then it will give you your output, and that's how you get it to work with that variation. And as I say, all the code is in the PBIX file if you want to play around with it if this comes a little bit too complicated, because once you start seeing it all working, it makes sense. And then all I do is then just wrap that in a return and then just do result, which is what this is. So now we got our filter. What we need to do is click on our table here, and then if we go to our filter, so a deviation filter, drop it onto filter for this visual, do is, and then do 1, apply filter, and then suddenly you have what the output is. Now, because we don't have any additional rows in there to pick out the information, we know below 19%, which is what it's picking up here, is the total. So we know below 19%, which is what this works out to, because it's 3 times this, take away on that, that's where you get 19. That will show you there. But if we move this down to say, let's do 15, you'll see it's changed. So how this works out now, the deviation is on the 3 is anything less than 9%. But because this is 12.7%, that actually sits between 1 and 2 deviation. Now, according to this, there isn't any states by the looks of it that are at that particular range. That's why you don't have it. But if we were now to just pick something, so I've got states there, but let's put in cities. This gives you more, because now you're getting more things that are covering that particular margin, and therefore you're getting that breakout. That's why you can see it there. So I'm just going to leave in cities for now, but one thing I'm going to do is just clean up this table, and the first thing I'm going to do, change the layout to tabular, and then if I come down here, row headers, I then want to turn on the icon, and the reason is, so now I can do this, and then we can look at all the different cities that are falling into that range. So anything greater than 21 is there. But if we were to change it So let's do back to our 25. You can see how it's changed now. So here is anything above 25. Let's just sort the margin actually. There we go. Yeah, anything above 25. And then anything here is below 25. We can see. And then if you've got two more percentage, so 27 up to 27, anything greater than 27, it's probably rounding actually, rounding up slightly, and then therefore, and then you get all the other ones that are greater than. So now we've got our groups working, we can just play around with different things to be able to get different results. So let's say if we just move this down to 1%, you can see how it's changed. But as you'll notice here, and what we have here is people won't know what those are, and you don't want people to sit there and start calculating going, oh, okay, so I've got it set as 25, so this one will then need to be 2 times 1, so that's 3, so that's 27, 28, which we can see here, but you can't see it there. And unfortunately, because tables are tables, you can't make these dynamic. There's not a way of being able to dynamically change anything unless you're able to keep refreshing at the same time. So if you're doing an update in, say, Power BI Desktop, you could sit there and do refresh and then update what the name is and all this kind of stuff, but you won't be able to do that in Service. So what you can do is actually create a measure like here that actually gives you what the grouping is. So therefore you do have a dynamic name. And to prove that point, if you look here again, you can see this is 1, 1, 1, 1. But if I was just to move this to half, you'll see these will change to 0.5% different. So these are changing by 0.5% of a deviation. So now it's 25 to 25.5, 25.5 to 26, so on and so forth. So how you create that is technically the same as what we did previous. It's just we needed to create a formatting that will pick up the information that we got here. We're using variables just because it just makes it so much easier to maintain, and being able to just populate if you wanted to create your own with a different metric and a different slider. And again, I've created a variable that's called selector, which is the margin percent selector, which is the one on the left. So this one here, so that one which we got here, and then your var selector, which is this one here, is then your var, and then you want to do what your format is. And in this case, because we're doing percentage, we want it to be percentage. So all I've done is put in brackets what the format is here. If you ever need to change the format, you can just change it here and then it will update everywhere else. That's the power of using variables. So in this case, we don't need to create a filter that's going, is it true or false? All we're doing is looking for, if it says this, then give this as the result. And if it says this, give this result. So all we're running through here is a switch with a has one value with the table and the column you want in. This is to ensure that this doesn't break when you do it. So if you remove that, this won't actually work. That's why you need to run in through the has one value, because it needs to ensure that if it has just one value, then give the result. And then we are taking our top one again, and then all we're doing is doing it as a max this time, because we're going to be working with what is actually called, and it's not so much selecting it like it was before. This is now going to be just, we want to take the max of. It's the only way you can get it to work with the format. And I think it's because you're using it as text, and therefore it's a string, and then you can actually do the formatting. In this case, you wrap your column and your table with your max, and then you call whatever you want to call it. So it equals, in this case, the top one, which is your plus percentage 3 or more deviations. And then so if that is selected, then you want to return in brackets greater than and a space. So then you get the greater than symbol and then the space, and then formatting the selector, which is the one on the left, plus 3 times the variable selector, which at the moment we've got as 0.5, but before it was 2, so therefore 31. And then the format we want to put it under, because we're wrapping this all in format, and then it's changing it, because otherwise it comes through as a decimal place. So you want to be able to actually set it as a percentage, and then to get 1 decimal place on a percentage, you want to do in quotation marks 0.0% sign, and that's your format here. In reality, you would have selector, which would be all this 3 times this, and then comma, so after the brackets, comma, and then you're putting in what your format is, which would be this. This just makes it easier to update and also read. And then because that one's greater than, we then need to do our thing of, well, if it is this one, then we want to say it's this format, it's this percent. So selector plus 2 times the var selector, and then the format again is a percentage. And then because we're doing an actual string name here, we're then doing, so from that one we do and then put the hyphen in between the 2 quotation marks, and then and again, and then we join on what is the greater, which in this case is 3 times, so 0.1%. So if this one's selected, 26 to 26.5%, which you see here. You see how that's working? It's giving you the name. You keep doing that, and then obviously like last time, and when it comes to the minuses, you're just reversing which one sits where. For the plus 0 to 1, which is your 25 to 25.5. It's now you want to go, I want to do -1 to 25. So 24.5 to 25. And then that gives you your -1 to 0, -0 to 1 deviation. And then you keep repeating the same until you get to your last one, which in that case is just you're doing, instead of above, because it's now the -1, so it's below. So you just do below space in quotation marks and then in the format, you then do your selector -3 times the var selector. And then that gives you this. So if we drop that now into just in front of the margin, it has a very long name, but we don't want that long name. So we're just going to call it groups. And then what we can do is decide we don't want to have this deviation one anymore. So you got a choice. You can rename it how you want. And the reason I'm going to do a full stop, because sometimes I like to have blank rows as partitions when I'm working with tables, and I normally break those out with a title of space. I do that as a full stop so it doesn't fall into the same one. And then what you can do is bring these in. Now you notice, this is now wrapping. So what we want to do is go over to our format, and then under the row headers, we want to turn off text wrap. And then if we do this, we now don't have it. And then suddenly you still got your plus and minuses, but it's no longer showing you the deviation names. So you can make it nice and small. So these match up. I am now going to just remove city from here. This will change. And then I'm going to drop in from the sales table state, as it's easier to work with. And then all you do is just drop it afterwards. So now we got everything matching up here. You see it's all the same. So if I open up, let's open up this one. Washington's the only one there. Washington's the only one there. So as you can see, this is exactly the same table. The only difference is at the moment is we don't have what is this color coding. As you can see, anything that's above is green, anything below is red. And that applies to even when you open these up, as you can see here. So how you create that is very straightforward. All you need to do is name it whatever you want. In this case, I've just called it margin % selector target CF for conditional format. And then within there, I've just created an if, and then I'm just saying if margin is greater than or equal to the margin selector value, which is the one on the left, so the 25%, we got that set to at the moment, then use this hex code, which is this green, or use this hex code, which is this red. So you can change the colors as much as you want. And also it'd probably be a good idea to do this even within variables as well, because then you can just set, here's my top color, bottom color, and then you can do margin as a metric variable and this selector as selector variable, and then you can just switch them out easily. But because there's not a lot going on here, I just kept it simple like this. But if you wanted to do a range of colors, so you almost do a gradient going on, then you can do the same sort of logic that's done with this, with the format. And then you can create something where it does different colors depending on which group it falls into. So then once you've got that measure, all you have to do is click on your table, come all the way down to cell elements. Under here, under series, you want to select your margin, and then your background color just turn on. And then if we do FX, and then under here, because we already have the color set, we don't need to do any rules. We can just select fill value. And then within here, you can select what it's called. Now the handy thing about just calling it CF is you can just type CF and then you can select it. Once you're done, do OK, and there you go. You have got your conditional formatting set. And what makes these tables even more powerful and great is not only can you play around with what your ranges are and everything, but if you wanted to drop in, say, more metrics, so let's go total sales, let's drop that in, and then the percentage of those sales, and then we put that in, and then we can see that of total sales, in this case it's 2017, the majority actually are below this threshold here, which is a bit of a concern. But let's say, well, that's not a problem. Our target was 18%, and we just want to see what's the difference between 1% of that 18. So if we change this to 18 and then we change this to 1, we can see the majority of the sales are above the margin target. However, as we know, as a total, it is not. And one thing you'll notice is that the groups don't always come out correctly when it comes to the totals. Now, normally has one value does play a part in being able to actually remove this. There are other things you can do, but sometimes they don't always work. It's so annoying. It's like literally, I don't know if it's just general bugs that happen with Microsoft, but sometimes they don't always work, or they worked and then suddenly they stop working. I always find the safest option is to just take out the group color. So if you go down to specific column, find your groups, it's already there. And then you see you got these different things here. You got total. So if you click on total and click off everything else, you can change the text color. Now this has gone on to a gray, but really I would want to make that white. And as you can see, it's hidden there. But that's because if we go back to our table, alternative background, just make it white. So there you go, you got rid of it. So therefore now it's gone and you won't see it. It's still there, but it doesn't affect anything that you see. So that's where that can come in handy, just to get rid of just that, because it's not useful. But as you can see, the power of being able to create different metrics. And then how that can look if you then just brought that into more metrics is now, if you look at the table here, we've still got the same breakout with our sales and thing, but now we've got our profit, and how much of that profit compared to the previous year has changed. What's the margin, which is what we want to set here like that. And then the number of orders, the average transaction value, how much discount is going on. So this then tells you everything below 15% is pulling out a minus profit of 35. And that's because the issue of having stuff that is actually minus margin. And then you can open up and then look at them to see, okay, which ones are taking up the most? And one of the highest profit ones here actually takes up quite a bit of the 6% of the total sales. And then they've actually got a minus profit of 8 grand, which is less than what they had before. They're even performing even worse. But you'll notice the great thing about having these are, even if you don't break them down, you can have a look at that group. The cause of it isn't so much that the items are low margin or they've only applied a bit of a discount. Literally, of those ones below 15% margin, almost all of them had a discount applied on all orders. The number of discounts applied, discounts that were above 20%. 100% on that one, so there's only one in there that had one that's over 20%, but 34%, where even with the top ones there's some with 5, but they've had so many. And then the average discount is 33%, and that's where you can see what's driving it down. It's not necessarily the product, it's the discounting that's happening here. And that's where it can just pull out really quickly to see, okay, now if I wanted to break it out a bit more, so let's make it 3%. And then we can see it's breaking out more. So 9% now is showing up there. So let's do 5%. So now you're doing less than 3%. It still takes up 31% of the total sales. You can see where the growth on the highest margin ones, it starts to get smaller and smaller. So your main part is around here. And this is the power of being able to dynamically change your groups, because you're able to then play around to actually see, okay, what's the core things creating positive or negative impact on the business. And as you would have noticed, up here we've got one that is just a group of above and below. And if you want to know how to create that one, check out this video over here where I show you how. And as always, until next time.